The zipper on that suitcase was so loud in the silence of that house. I remember thinking, don't stop, don't stop, don't stop, like if I paused even for 1 second, I would talk myself out of it again. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely fold my blouses. I kept dropping things. A heel. My grandmother's earrings. A photo I almost left behind and then decided, no. That one comes with me. It was 2:47 in the morning. The house was dark except for the lamp on my side of the bedroom. My side. As if I ever really owned a side of anything in that house. Everyone else was asleep. I could hear Marcus, Raymond's nephew who had been staying with us for the past 2 months, snoring lightly from the room at the end of the hall. I could hear the low hum of the television that Darlene had fallen asleep watching in the living room again. Everything was so normal. So routine. So completely unbothered, and there I was, packing my whole life into one large suitcase and a carry-on tote, trying not to breathe too loud. I remember looking at my own reflection in the mirror on the closet door. I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me at first. She looked tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. She looked hollowed out. She looked like someone who had been giving and giving and giving until there was almost nothing left to give. But her jaw was set. And her eyes, Lord, her eyes had something in them I hadn't seen in years. Resolve. Real, unshakable, quiet resolve. I zipped that suitcase closed, and I whispered something to myself, low and slow, like a prayer I had been practicing in secret for a long time. They thought I'd never leave. And that's exactly why I had to. But to understand why I was standing in that dark bedroom at 2:47 in the morning with a suitcase packed and nowhere to go but forward, you have to understand who I was before that night. Before I became the woman everyone assumed would always stay. Before I became the woman whose endurance people counted on like a utility bill. Before I became furniture. You have to understand who Camille was. My name is Camille Yvette Broussard. And before everything unraveled, before the silence became something I wore like a second skin, before I forgot what it felt like to be a whole person with needs and wants and opinions that deserved to be heard, I was someone worth knowing. I grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the third of 4 daughters raised by a woman named Dorothy Broussard. My mama. A woman who could stretch $20 into a full week of groceries, who could sew a prom dress from scratch with nothing but a pattern and determination, who could quote a Bible verse for every single situation life threw at you before you even finished explaining your problem. Mama was extraordinary. Anyone who knew her would tell you that without hesitation. But Mama was also a woman of her generation and her raising. She believed, deep in her bones, that a good woman endures. That a good woman doesn't raise her voice. That a good woman doesn't make herself the problem. That a good woman holds the household together even when the household is slowly crumbling around her, and she does it without complaint, without fanfare, and without asking anyone to acknowledge the weight she is carrying. Mama never said these things out loud, not exactly. She didn't sit us down and give us a lesson called How to Disappear Gracefully. She taught it the way most mothers teach the deepest lessons, by living it in front of us every single day until it became the water we swam in. Until it became the only way we knew how to be. I loved my mother then. I love her now. I will love her until my last breath. But I spent the first 37 years of my life living out her lesson so faithfully that I nearly lost myself entirely in the process. I was the quiet one. The dependable one. The one people described as sweet, as steady, as solid. I never caused trouble growing up. I made good grades, stayed out of situations that didn't serve me, went to church every Sunday in my good shoes, graduated from Southern University with a degree in business administration with honors, and I carried into adulthood this genuine, unshakable belief that if you loved people well enough, worked hard enough, gave freely enough, life would give it back to you. I believed in people. I believed in the goodness of people. And that was not a flaw. I want to say that clearly. Believing in people is not a character defect. But believing in people more than you believe in yourself, trusting others with your worth before you've fully claimed it, that is how the trap is set. And for Black women who have been raised on the gospel of endurance and service, that trap is laid with the best of intentions and the most familiar hands. I didn't know it was a trap. I thought it was just who I was. I met Raymond James Whitfield when I was 26 years old at a cookout in Atlanta. I had just moved there 6 months prior for a job, junior analyst at a mid-size financial consulting firm. I was excited about my life in the way that you can only be excited when you are young and hopeful and the future feels like it belongs entirely to you. I had my little apartment in Decatur with the second-hand furniture I had made look intentional, my good job, my good sense, my good shoes, and my whole future stretched out ahead of me like something worth running toward. Raymond walked into that cookout with his cousin Dion, wearing a white linen shirt and smiling like he had never experienced a single loss in his entire life. He was handsome. That kind of handsome that makes you adjust your posture a little when he moves in your direction. He had this deep, easy laugh and a way of talking that was unhurried and warm, like he had nowhere more important to be than right here, right now, with you. He asked about my job that evening. He asked specific, thoughtful questions. And then, and this is what got me, this is the thing that undid me, he actually listened to my answers. He didn't wait politely for his turn to talk. He didn't scan the room for someone more interesting. He leaned in. He nodded. He asked follow-up questions. In a world full of men who treated conversation like a performance they needed an audience for, Raymond listened. And for a woman who had been quietly, faithfully investing in everyone around her since she was old enough to understand the assignment, being truly heard felt like the rarest and most precious thing. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. Those 2 years were genuinely, honestly good. Raymond called when he said he would call. He showed up when he said he would show up. He met my mama and charmed her completely. Mama called me the evening after that first meeting and said, in her quiet, measured way, "Camille, baby, don't you mess this one up." He remembered things I mentioned in passing, a restaurant I wanted to try, a movie I was looking forward to, a situation at work I was anxious about. He made me feel seen. He made me feel chosen. He made me feel like I had found the person who would be my person. He proposed on a Sunday evening in October, on the rooftop of a restaurant downtown, and I said yes before he had fully finished the question. Of course I said yes. The wedding was small and beautiful and intimate, 40 guests at a gorgeous venue outside of Atlanta on a crisp October Saturday. I wore my grandmother's pearl earrings and a dress I had spent 6 months slowly saving for. I cried through most of my vows, not from sadness but from the overwhelming fullness of believing I was standing at the threshold of something that was going to be wonderful. And for a little while, the first year, maybe 14 months, it was. We settled into a house in Stone Mountain. 3 bedrooms, a backyard, a neighborhood with sidewalks where people walked their dogs in the evenings. Raymond had a solid job in corporate sales. I was doing well and growing at the firm. We were building something real, or at least it looked like something real from where I was standing. Then Raymond's mother, Darlene, had a fall. She lived alone in Memphis, had been living alone since Raymond's father passed 8 years prior. She was in her late 60s, fiercely independent by nature, not the kind of woman who asked for help easily. But she had slipped coming down her front steps and hurt her hip badly enough that navigating her house alone was genuinely difficult, at least temporarily. Raymond and I sat down together, and I want to give this moment its full credit because it was a genuine conversation, not a demand, and we agreed that having his mother come stay with us while she recovered was the right thing to do. He asked me if I was comfortable with it. I said yes, and I meant it. I genuinely meant it. We said temporary. We both used that word. Temporarily, until she was healed and back on her feet and could return to Memphis comfortably. I fixed up our guest room with care. New curtains in a soft yellow she had once mentioned she liked. A small lamp on the nightstand. Fresh towels in her favorite color, which I had learned from Raymond was a dusty rose. I drove to Whole Foods and bought the things her doctor had said she should be eating during recovery. I arranged her toiletries on the bathroom shelf before she arrived. I wanted her to feel welcomed. I wanted her to feel at home. I wanted Raymond to see that his wife was a woman who showed up for family. Darlene arrived on a Thursday afternoon in March. And I want to be fair to her, even now. Darlene was not a villain in the cartoonish sense. She wasn't screaming at me or throwing things or making outright cruel statements. She was something more nuanced and, in some ways, more difficult to name. She was quietly, consistently, persistently the center of everything. She had a way of occupying a room that didn't leave much air for anyone else. And her relationship with Raymond was the kind where a grown man with a good career and a wife and a mortgage could still be repositioned, in the presence of his mother, into a boy who needed her approval. She'd been in our house 3 weeks when she rearranged my kitchen cabinets. I came home from work on a Tuesday to find that every cabinet in my kitchen had been reorganized. The glasses were in a different place. The pots were stacked differently. The spice rack had been moved to a different wall entirely. She had apparently been bothered for weeks by the arrangement and had decided, without mentioning it to me, to simply change it. When Raymond came home that evening, before I could say a word, Darlene called out cheerfully from the living room, "Raymond, baby, I hope you don't mind, I reorganized the kitchen today. Camille had everything in such inconvenient places. It'll be much better now." And Raymond walked into the kitchen, looked around, and said, "Mama, you didn't have to do all that." Not, "Mama, that's Camille's kitchen. Please don't rearrange things without asking her." Not, "Babe, I'm sorry, let me talk to her." Just the gentle, affectionate deflection. And then he looked at me with a small smile that said, "You know how she is," as clearly as if he had spoken the words out loud. And I was supposed to receive that look as sufficient. As an apology. As acknowledgement enough. I smiled back. I said, "It's fine." And I went about cooking dinner in a kitchen that no longer felt like mine. That became a pattern in ways I didn't fully recognize at the time because each individual incident was small enough to dismiss. Small enough to absorb. Small enough to file under not worth the conflict. Darlene commenting that I didn't season my chicken the way Raymond liked, she knew because she had raised him, after all. Darlene mentioning to Raymond that the living room was getting cluttered, which really meant my books and work bag and the small things I kept near the couch were bothering her. Darlene referring to the house as our home when she spoke to her church friends on the phone, in a way that quietly, imperceptibly erased the fact that this was not her home. This was my home. Mine and Raymond's. 6 months passed. Darlene's hip had healed completely. She was walking without assistance, going to church on Sundays with the friends of a woman from our neighborhood who had taken to her, cooking her own breakfast every morning with no trouble. The medical reason for her being in our home had resolved. But she was still there. And when I raised it, gently, carefully, on a quiet Sunday evening when Raymond and I were alone in the kitchen, he looked at me with an expression that I can only describe as disappointed. "She's my mother, Camille," he said. Just that. Those 4 words arranged like a wall. "I know she's your mother," I said, keeping my voice steady and low. "And I love that about you, that you want to take care of her. I'm just wondering if we should start talking about what the next steps look like. Whether she's thinking about going back to Memphis or..." "She's comfortable here," Raymond said. "And she's not hurting anything." "Raymond, I'm not saying she's hurting anything. I'm saying we never had a conversation about this becoming permanent, and I think we should." "Camille." He said my name in a way that closed the conversation rather than opened it. "She's my mother. I'm not putting my mother out. I had not suggested putting her out. I had suggested having a conversation. But that distinction had collapsed in the space between my mouth and his ears, and now I was the woman who wanted to put her mother-in-law out, and if I pressed further, that was the story that would solidify. I said, "Okay." I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed and I breathed. And I added that moment to the growing collection of moments I was storing somewhere inside myself, in a place I didn't have a name for yet. By the 3rd year of our marriage, I had begun to understand the architecture of what I was living in. It wasn't dramatic. That's the thing about this kind of life, it doesn't look like what people imagine when they imagine a difficult marriage. There were no black eyes. No screaming matches that woke the neighbors. No obvious, undeniable cruelty that would make the situation simple for anyone looking in from the outside. What there was a persistent, daily, low-grade invisibility. The kind where your husband comes home and greets his mother before he greets you. Not every time, just enough times that you notice. The kind where dinner you cooked gets eaten without comment. Not a complaint, but no acknowledgement either. Just consumption, like food appearing on a table, is a natural phenomenon that doesn't require a source. The kind where your opinion in a household decision is asked for but never quite lands, never quite shifts the outcome, so eventually you stop offering it to preserve your own dignity. I was the person who managed everything in that house. And I want you to understand the scope of everything, because it is important. I managed the finances. All of them. I paid the mortgage, the utilities, the insurance, the car notes. I kept the budget, tracked the spending, filed the taxes. Raymond hated paperwork and Darlene had never handled finances on her own. So it fell to me, and I did it, and no one thanked me for it because it was invisible labor, the kind that only becomes visible when it stops happening. I managed the household maintenance. When the HVAC made a strange noise, I found the repairman and scheduled the appointment. When the dishwasher started leaking, I researched the problem, called 3 services for quotes, picked the best one, and stayed home from my lunch break to let the man in. When the HOA sent a letter about the grass being too long, I hired the landscaper. I remembered every birthday in Raymond's family. I bought the cards. I mailed them. I kept a calendar of his cousin's kids' birthdays so he would never be the nephew who forgot. I grocery shopped according to what everyone else wanted. I cooked according to what Darlene could eat, what Raymond preferred, what was easy enough to stretch across a week of lunches. I cooked for their preferences so routinely that I had genuinely forgotten the last time I cooked something purely because I wanted to eat it. I was 30 years old and I had made myself into a system. A very efficient, very invisible system. And the people in that house moved through their days entirely supported by that system, entirely unaware of its existence. My friend Kezia noticed before I could admit it to myself. We were driving back from dinner one Friday night in her car, and I was telling her about the week, a story about Darlene rearranging the bookshelf in the hallway, casually, like she was in her own home, and I was telling it the way I always told these stories, with a kind of tired, self-deprecating humor, the way you laugh at things so you don't have to cry about them. And Kezia was quiet for a long moment after I finished. Not a contemplative quiet. A pointed one. "Camille," she said finally. When did you last do something that was just for you?" I opened my mouth to answer and then closed it. I thought about it. Really thought about it. "I went to get my nails done last month," I said. "With your sister when she was visiting. So you could spend time with her." "That doesn't count." Silence. "I can't think of anything," I admitted. "I know," Kezia said. "That's why I asked." I looked out the window at the nighttime streets sliding past. "It's not that bad," I said. Which was not the same as saying it was good. "You cook every night?" "Almost." "You manage the money for the whole house?" "Yes." "You run every errand, make every appointment, track every birthday?" Kez. And what does Raymond do? He works, I said. He provides. So do you, she said flatly. You work full-time, Camille. And then you come home and work a second full-time job that nobody pays you for or even notices you're doing. I didn't have a response to that. And his mama is still there, she said. Not a question. She lives there now, I said, very quietly. Kezia breathed out through her nose. Okay, she said. Just that. But what she meant, and what I heard underneath it, was, I see what this is, even if you can't say it yet. I drove home that night and lay in the dark next to Raymond and I stared at the ceiling and I thought about what Kezia had said. And somewhere underneath the part of me that was practiced at reframing and enduring and finding the silver lining, there was another part of me, quieter, more honest, that whispered, she's right. You know she's right. The fourth year brought something new into the dynamic, something that shifted the atmosphere of that house in ways that took me a while to name. Raymond started being different. Not dramatically different. Not in any way I could point to and say, there, that's the problem, look at that. It was subtle. It was the way you can tell the weather is changing before the first cloud appears, something in the air shifts, some quality of the light changes, and your body knows before your mind catches up. He was more distracted. More absent even when physically present. He laughed less at things I said. He touched me less, not in an obvious, attention-grabbing way, just a gradual withdrawal of warmth, like a thermostat being turned down 1 degree at a time, so slow you barely register the cold until it's fully settled in. I was promoted that year. From junior analyst to senior analyst. It was something I had been working toward steadily for nearly 4 years. My director called me into her office on a Thursday afternoon, told me the committee had voted unanimously in my favor, and shook my hand. I walked out of that meeting feeling 10 feet tall. I texted Raymond, I got the promotion, baby. Senior analyst. They just told me. He texted back a thumbs up emoji. Not congratulations. Not I'm so proud of you. Not let's celebrate tonight. A thumbs up. I stared at my phone for a moment. I told myself he was probably in a meeting. I went home that evening and he was on the couch watching television. Darlene was in her room. I walked in and he looked up. Hey, he said. Hey. I set my bag down. Did you get my text? Yeah. Congrats, babe. He turned back to the television. I stood in the center of my living room in my work clothes and I felt the brightness of that Thursday afternoon promotion drain slowly out of me, like water out of a tub. I had driven home imagining, not a party, nothing extravagant, just some acknowledgement. Dinner out. A hug that lasted more than 2 seconds. I am so proud of you, Camille. You worked so hard for this. Just that. Just that would have been enough. I went to the kitchen and I started dinner. Darlene came downstairs a little while later and said, oh good, you're cooking. Raymond said he was hungry earlier. I stirred the pot and said nothing. That night I called my sister Renee and told her about the promotion. She screamed. She cheered. She made me repeat the details 3 times. She said, Camille, do you know how hard you worked for that? Do you know how proud Mama is going to be? We talked for 45 minutes. She made me feel every bit of what that moment deserved. After I hung up, I sat in the bathroom with the door closed for a while. Then I washed my face and went to bed. Raymond was already asleep. By the 5th year I had started seeing a therapist. Her name was Dr. Sandra Patterson, a black woman in her 50s who operated out of a quiet, warm office in Buckhead, and who had the particular gift of being able to look at you with such calm steadiness that you felt, for the first time in a long time, like you were safe enough to tell the truth. I had not told Raymond or Darlene I was going. Not because I was ashamed of it, I had no shame about therapy, I had always believed in it, but because I had learned to keep the things that were purely mine very close and very quiet. The therapy sessions were mine. I was not offering them up for commentary. The first session I mostly just talked. Dr. Patterson mostly just listened. I told her about the house, about Darlene, about Raymond's increasing distance, about the promotion nobody celebrated, about the years of managing everything while becoming invisible. In the second session she said, "Camille, I want to ask you something. And I want you to answer it as honestly as you can, not with the answer you think you should give." "Okay," I said. "What do you actually need right now? Not what would make things easier for everyone else. What do you need?" The question sat in the room between us for a long time. "I need someone to see me," I finally said. "I need to be in a room with someone who actually sees me. Not what I do. Not what I provide. Just me. Camille." She nodded. Slowly and carefully. "When was the last time that happened?" she asked. I thought about it honestly. "In this room," I said. "Right now." She held that without rushing past it. And in the silence that followed, I felt something shift very slightly inside my chest. Like a window being opened in a room that had been sealed shut for too long. I kept going. Every 2 weeks, I sat in that room and I told the truth, and I felt myself being slowly, carefully excavated from underneath the life I had been buried in. The 5th year was also when the Thursday evenings began. Raymond started coming home late on Thursday nights. Once, it was understandable, a work dinner, a networking event. Twice, still plausible. By the 4th Thursday in a row, I had noticed, and I was doing what I had always done, noticing, filing, not yet speaking. By the 8th consecutive Thursday, I had also noticed that his phone was always face down on the counter now. That he had started being careful in a particular way, not warmer, but smoother. Like he was managing the atmosphere between us rather than inhabiting it. I noticed. I noticed everything. I always had. One Thursday night he came in at 11:40, and I was at the kitchen table with tea I hadn't drunk, and he looked genuinely surprised to see me sitting there in the light. "You didn't have to wait up," he said. "I wasn't waiting up," I said. "I live here." Something flickered across his face. He loosened his tie. "Long day." "Tell me about it," I said. Which was an invitation. He didn't take it. He got a glass of water, drank it standing at the sink with his back to me. "Raymond," I said. Just his name. He turned around. "What? Are you happy? In this marriage?" He set the glass down very carefully. "What kind of question is that at midnight?" "The honest kind," I said. "I'm asking honestly." He looked at me for a moment. And I watched something move across his face, not guilt, exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something self-protective. "I'm tired, Camille," he said. "Can we not do this right now? When would you like to do it?" "Not right now." "Raymond." I said not right now. His voice had an edge. Not loud, but final. "You're always making something out of nothing. You always want to have some big conversation at the worst possible time." I looked at him. "Okay," I said. And I poured my cold tea down the drain, rinsed the cup, and went upstairs. That night I lay on my side of the bed in the dark and I breathed through the ache in my chest that I was becoming practiced at breathing through, and I thought clearly, for perhaps the first time without flinching away from it, something is wrong. Something has been wrong for a long time. And pretending otherwise is only working in one direction, his. I started seeing Dr. Patterson weekly after that. The 6th year was when the weight became something I could no longer distribute evenly across my body. It started to show. Not on the outside. On the outside I was still Camille who showed up, Camille who managed, Camille who kept the peace. But inside I could feel myself bending. The way a shelf bends under too much weight, slowly, quietly, before it gives. I stopped calling friends back as quickly. I stopped finishing books. I stopped wearing the perfume Raymond had said he loved on me once, years ago, because nobody noticed whether I wore it or not. I cooked only what everyone else wanted, stopped making my own favorites entirely. I went to bed earlier and earlier not because I was tired but because sleep was the only space where no one needed anything from me. My sister Renee called on a Saturday morning and after we talked for 20 minutes about regular things, she went quiet and then said, "Camille. Look me in the eye. We're on the phone, Renee. You know what I mean. Are you happy?" The word sat in the air. "I'm managing," I said. "Baby, that's not what I asked." "It's complicated, Renee." "Is it, though?" she said. "Or have you just been telling yourself it's complicated because leaving feels scarier than staying?" I pressed my lips together. "You know you're allowed to go," she said gently. "That is a real option available to you. Leaving. It's a real thing people do. You know that, right?" "I know," I said. Even though some part of me had forgotten. "I love you," she said. "And I will be here for whatever you decide. But I need you to know that I see what's happening to you. And I'm scared for you." After we hung up I sat with that for a long time. And then the Thanksgiving happened. It was November, the 6th year. I had been preparing for that Thanksgiving dinner for 4 days. 4 full days of planning, shopping, prepping, cooking. My family drove in from Baton Rouge, Mama, Renee, my youngest sister Portia and her 2 kids. Darlene's 2 closest friends came over. Raymond's cousin Dion was there with his wife. 12 people altogether at my table. I made a full spread. Turkey brined overnight and roasted slowly. Cornbread dressing from scratch using my grandmother's recipe that I had memorized from watching her make it since I was 7 years old. Smothered green beans with smoked turkey. Candied yams with real cane syrup. Macaroni and cheese, real macaroni and cheese, the kind with 3 cheeses and a custard base, baked until the top was golden. A sweet potato pie. A pecan pie. Homemade rolls. I had been on my feet since 6 o'clock that morning. When everyone sat down and the food was laid out and the table looked the way I had always imagined a family table should look, abundant and warm and full of love made edible, Darlene looked around, picked up her fork, and said, with her church lady brightness, loud enough for the whole table, "Raymond, baby, next year we really should just cater. All this home cooking is sweet but it's such an ordeal. Remember the year your Aunt Bernice catered? Everything came out so fresh and nobody had to be exhausted." The table settled into a small, brief, awkward pause. Raymond smiled his easy smile and said, "Yeah, Mama, that's not a bad idea." Nobody looked at me. Except Renee. Renee looked at me from across the table, and in her eyes I saw everything. She saw me, the 4 days, the 6 in the morning, the grandmother's recipe, the 3 cheeses, the pecan pie. She saw all of it. And her eyes said, "I'm sorry. I see you. I'm sorry." I looked down at my plate. I said, "More water, anyone?" And I got up and went to the kitchen, and I stood at the counter with my hand on the cold granite for 30 seconds, and I breathed. And then I went back and I served and I smiled and I refilled glasses and I laughed at the right moments and I cleaned up afterward while everyone else moved to the living room. My mama helped me wash dishes. She stood beside me at the sink and didn't say much. At one point she put her wet hand over mine and held it. Just for a moment. Just long enough. That gesture almost broke me open. Almost. I held myself together. Because that's what I did. Because I was very, very good at it. But something had been marked. Some interior register had noted, "This is what it costs, and you are paying it alone, and nobody is keeping track except you." 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, there was a Saturday dinner. Raymond had invited his cousin Dion and his wife Tamara, and their neighbors the Washingtons, a couple who had moved in 2 houses down and with whom Raymond and Darlene had struck up a friendship. 6 of us at the table, plus Darlene. I had cooked a full meal again. Baked chicken glazed with honey and herbs, rice, a green salad with the dressing made from scratch, warm rolls, a lemon pound cake for dessert. The conversation was good, easy, full of laughter and the kind of energy that gathers around a well-set table. I was present. I was laughing. I was participating. I was also, as always, tracking the water glasses, watching whether anyone needed anything, calculating when to bring out the dessert. At some point the conversation shifted to relationships. To what makes marriages last. Dion was talking about how his parents had stayed together for 42 years, and what he thought made them work. Raymond was holding court in the way he loved to do with an audience, leaning back in his chair, warm and authoritative. The secret, Raymond said, is choosing someone who can handle the hard seasons without bailing. Someone with staying power. He glanced at me when he said it. I kept my face pleasant and still. Darlene laughed her light, pretty laugh and said, "Well, Raymond, you certainly don't have to worry about that. Camille isn't going anywhere." She said it fondly, the way you say something fond. She knows which side her bread is buttered on. The table chuckled. And then Raymond, my husband, the man I had married on an October Saturday in my grandmother's pearl earrings, the man I had cooked for and cleaned for and managed for and been invisible for across 6 years, Raymond smiled at me across the table and said, with full casual certainty, in front of Dion and Tamara and the Washingtons and his mother. "She knows she needs us too much to ever leave." The table laughed again. Easy, comfortable, after-dinner laughter. I picked up my water glass. I took a slow, deliberate sip. I set it down. I smiled. "Who wants more chicken?" I said. And I got up and went to the kitchen, and I stood at the counter, and I put both hands flat on the cold surface, and I closed my eyes. And in the dark behind my eyes I saw it all with a clarity that was almost violent in its precision. 6 years of dinners and dishes and errand running and bill paying. 6 years of swallowed words and manufactured smiles. 6 years of choosing their peace over my truth. 6 years of becoming invisible by degrees until the man who was supposed to love me most could sit at a table full of people and say, out loud, with confidence, that I was too dependent to ever choose myself. In front of witnesses. Like it was a fun, harmless, true thing to say. I breathed. 14 days, I told myself. Because I had already made the decision. I had already signed the lease. I had already put down the deposit on the small, clean, quiet one-bedroom apartment 12 miles from my office. I had already moved most of my boxes out in small increments over the preceding weeks, sliding them into storage on my lunch breaks and after-work errands while Raymond was at work and Darlene was at her church circle. I had already rerouted my direct deposit to the new account. I had already set up my mail forwarding. I had already done everything that needed doing in the dark, in the quiet, without a single person in that house suspecting that the woman they counted on for everything had been, for the past 2 months, arranging her own departure with the calm and precision of someone who had decided, really decided, down to the bone, that she was done. I had decided the night of the headache. That was the night it crystallized. It had been a Tuesday, 2 months before the dinner party. I had come home from work early because I had a tension headache that had been building behind my eyes for 2 full days. I texted Raymond that I was unwell and coming home early, and he said he'd pick up dinner so I wouldn't have to cook. He didn't pick up dinner. He came home at 7:30, walked in, exchanged greetings with his mother, and ate the plate Darlene had warmed up for him in the microwave while I was lying on the couch with a cloth over my eyes. For 20 minutes I lay on that couch while my husband had dinner and laughed with his mother in the kitchen 20 feet away from me. Not once did anyone come to check on me. Not one glass of water. Not one Tylenol brought quietly to the couch. Not one hand on my shoulder, not one "you feeling any better, babe?" Nothing. I was 20 feet away and I was invisible. And lying there on that couch with the cloth over my eyes, I experienced a moment of absolute, terrible clarity. This is what I am in this house. Not a wife. Not a partner. Not a person whose presence matters in any dimension other than functional. I am the thing that runs this household, and when the thing is down, the household finds another way, and nobody checks on the thing. I sat up. I took the cloth off my eyes. And I said out loud, to the empty living room, in a voice so quiet it barely displaced the air, I deserve more than this. Not as a wish. Not as a negotiation. Not as a prelude to a conversation with Raymond about how I was feeling. As a fact. A clear, solid, irrevocable fact. I deserve more than this. And I went upstairs, and I sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time in a very long time, I did not cry. I just sat with what was true. I let it be true without managing it or softening it or finding a way to make it tolerable. The next morning I started looking at apartments. 3 weeks later I had signed a lease. I told Kezia first. I called her from the parking lot of a grocery store on a Tuesday evening, sitting in my car with the windows up. "Kez," I said when she answered. "What's wrong?" She could hear it. She always could. "Nothing's wrong," I said. "Actually, nothing is wrong. Kezia, I'm leaving Raymond." A pause that lasted exactly 2 seconds. "Finally," she said. And then she cried, which made me cry, and then we were both crying and laughing at the same time, sitting on a phone call that lasted 2.5 hours while I told her everything, the apartment, the deposit, the boxes, the plan, the patience it had taken to hold this inside and keep moving like nothing was happening. She said, "Camille, I am so proud of you," so many times that by the end of the call something inside me was starting to believe it. The packing was its own ritual. Every few days, when the house was quiet, Raymond at work, Darlene out with her church friends, I would quietly and methodically fill a box or a bag with my things and slide it into my trunk. Books first, my own books, the ones I had collected before I ever set foot in that house. My professional certificates, framed and unframed. My grandmother's photo albums that she had pressed into my hands the Christmas before she passed. My good dishes, bought with my own money before the marriage. Certain pieces of clothing I loved. My grandmother's earrings, which I placed in a small velvet pouch and kept separate from everything else. I was calm during all of it. Remarkably, unexpectedly, completely calm. There was something almost sacred about the process. Like every item I placed in a box was a piece of myself being reclaimed. Like I was gathering the scattered parts of Camille Broussard back into one place, patiently, deliberately, with the care she had always deserved. On the outside I maintained everything. I cooked dinner. I paid the bills. I ran the errands. I said good morning to Darlene and kissed Raymond on the cheek before work and laughed at the right moments in conversation. I performed the life I was leaving as if I were still fully committed to it. This required something from me, a particular kind of internal discipline. But I had been disciplining my emotions for 6 years. I was extremely good at it. The difference now was that the discipline was in service of myself. I was using my own skills to free myself from the situation they had helped create. My move-out date was a Thursday. The night before, a Wednesday, I cooked dinner as usual. Smothered pork chops the way Darlene preferred them, with rice and a simple salad. I served the plates, cleared the table, washed the dishes, dried them, and stacked them in the cabinets. I wiped down the counters. I folded the dish towels and laid them neatly over the oven handle. I looked around that kitchen one last time. I thought about the woman who had first cooked in this kitchen 6 years ago, hopeful and full, certain she was building something lasting. I felt tenderness for her. I felt grief for her. She wasn't foolish. She was faithful. She loved as well as she knew how. But faithfulness without reciprocity is not a virtue. It's a slow disappearance. I went upstairs and told Raymond I had a headache and was going to bed early. He said, "Okay, babe," without looking up from his phone. I lay in the dark next to him and I listened to his breathing slow and deepen into sleep. And then I got up. It was 2:31 in the morning. I got dressed quietly in the bathroom. I went to the closet and I took out the suitcase I had positioned there 3 days earlier, already mostly packed, topped off with the last remaining items. I added the final things: my grandmother's earrings, my journal, my work laptop in its bag, my charger, the few toiletries I had held back. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, not exactly from fear. From the magnitude of it. From the understanding that this was real, this was happening, the woman in the mirror with the resolve in her eyes was actually doing this. I zipped the suitcase. I stood at the bedroom door for a moment and I looked at Raymond sleeping. And I want to tell you what I actually felt, because I owe this story honesty above everything else. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel vindicated. I felt something sadder and more complex than either of those, a grief for the marriage I had believed I was entering, for the man I had believed he was going to be, for the years I had spent loving someone who had somewhere along the way stopped considering whether his love for me was something I could actually feel. I loved him once. I believe he loved me once. And that made leaving harder and more necessary at the same time. I turned away from the door. I carried my suitcase and toted down the hall past Marcus's closed door, past Darlene's closed door where I could hear her slow, even breathing, down the stairs that I knew by feel in the dark, through the living room past Darlene's reading glasses folded on the side table, through the kitchen past the dish towels folded on the oven handle. I picked my keys off the hook by the door. I took one breath. I opened the door, walked out, and pulled it softly closed behind me. And I did not look back. I sat in my car in the driveway for 1 full minute. Not from hesitation, from ceremony. From allowing myself to mark this moment. To feel it fully. To say to myself, you did this. You actually did this. Then I started the car. I drove out of that neighborhood and through streets that were dark and quiet and orange-lit under the street lamps, and I drove with the windows cracked and the radio completely off and the silence around me like something I was finally allowed to have. I was terrified. I was free. I was grieving and certain and alive in a way I had forgotten I was capable of being. I got to my apartment at 3:15 in the morning. I let myself in with my new key. I set the suitcase down in the center of my empty living room, and I sat down on the floor beside it, and I wept. I wept for a long time. For everything it had cost me. For the years. For the girl who had walked into that marriage in her grandmother's pearl earrings believing she was standing at the beginning of something wonderful. For all the dinners and the swallowed words and the manufactured smiles and the night of the headache and the dinner table and she needs us too much to ever leave. I wept until I was completely empty. And then I got my sleeping bag from the tote, unrolled it on the living room floor, lay down, closed my eyes, and slept better than I had slept in 6 years. By 7 the next morning I had missed calls and messages cascading in. Raymond had called 11 times. He had texted, "Camille, where are you? Camille, call me. Camille, what is going on? Camille, please." He had called Kezia, she texted me, he called. I told him I hadn't heard from you. He sounds panicked. He had called Renee. He had called my mama. Renee texted, Raymond called looking for you. I told him you were fine and you'd be in touch when you were ready. Are you okay? I wrote back, better than okay. Thank you for not telling him anything. I love you. My mama's message came later, around 9. She texted, which she almost never did. It said, I know, baby. I'm proud of you. You call me when you're settled. I love you more than you know. I sat on my living room floor in the morning light coming through the windows and I read that text 4 times. My mama knew. My mama, who had modeled endurance her whole life, who had washed dishes in silence on Thanksgiving, who had never told me directly to leave, she had seen it all along. And she was proud. Not disappointed. Not worried. Proud. I called her an hour later and we talked for a long time. She told me things she had never said before, about what she had observed over those 6 years, about the things she had swallowed when she was in our home and saw how I was being treated, about the night of that Thanksgiving and what she had felt watching me go back to the kitchen with my face composed and my back straight and my dignity held together by sheer force of will. I kept waiting for you to see it, she said. I couldn't tell you. I knew you had to see it yourself. Why didn't you say something? I asked. She was quiet for a moment. Because I was afraid you'd stay anyway and it would just make things harder for you. And partly, she stopped. Partly because I didn't know how. I spent my whole life being the woman who stays. Telling you to go felt like saying everything I did was wrong. And it wasn't wrong, baby. It wasn't the only way. We were quiet together on the phone for a moment. You're the bravest one, she said softly. Of all my girls. You always were. I just didn't know what that was going to look like. I sent Raymond a text message 2 days after leaving. Not because he deserved an explanation, I was past the concept of owing people who had taken me for granted elaborate justifications. But because I needed to say it. For myself. Clearly. Finally. I wrote, Raymond. I've left. I'm safe and I'm not coming back. This isn't sudden, this has been building across years that I tried repeatedly to speak to and wasn't heard. I'm not angry. I don't wish you harm. I hope you'll take the time to understand what happened here, honestly. You'll hear from my attorney about the formal separation. I wish you well. He responded at length. Angry messages. Confused messages. Messages that tried to negotiate, to minimize, to reframe. He said after everything I've done. He said I thought we were fine. He said can you just come home and we can talk like adults. He said my mama is beside herself. I read them once. I did not respond. Darlene, I heard later, told her church friends that I had gone off the deep end and abandoned a good marriage for no good reason. Which was exactly what I expected. When you are the invisible, functional, enduring woman in a house and you leave, the people who depended most on your staying cannot comprehend the leaving through any lens that is honest about their own behavior. So they reach for other explanations. Outside influences. Instability. Selfishness. Anything except the truth. The truth, simply, was that I had chosen myself. And that was not a thing they had prepared for. My furniture arrived the second day. Kezia helped me arrange it, and we ordered pizza and sat on the floor eating it out of the box and drinking sparkling water, and she looked around at the apartment, my plants already on the windowsill, the morning light coming in at a good angle, the bookshelf I had started filling, and she said, Camille, this is so completely, entirely you. And she was right. For the first time in 6 years, the space I was in was entirely, uncomplicatedly me. The weeks that followed were not without difficulty. I want to be honest about that because this is not a fairy tale and you deserve the full truth. There were nights when the silence of the apartment pressed in heavily and I reached for the phone wanting to call someone and then had to sit with the discomfort of having no chaos to manage, no one to take care of, no function to perform. There were nights when grief came without warning, not for Raymond exactly, but for the marriage I had believed I was in, for the years I had spent faithfully, for the version of my future I had imagined on that October Saturday in my grandmother's earrings. Grief does not have a logical relationship with rightness. You can be completely correct in a decision and still grieve what it cost you. I gave myself permission to do both. I kept seeing Dr. Patterson. We talked through the guilt, because there was guilt, that old programming running its familiar loop. Did you try hard enough? Did you communicate enough? Could you have done something differently? Dr. Patterson was patient and consistent. The question is not whether you tried. The question is whether the trying was met. And Camille, based on everything you've told me, it was not. 6 months after I left, I was offered a management position at my firm. I applied, I interviewed, and I got it. I went to my car afterward and called my mama. "Mama," I said when she answered. "I got the promotion." And my mama, my quiet, faithful, dishwashing, keep the peace mama, cheered. She actually cheered, loud and joyful, like something that had been held back inside her for decades was finally allowed out. We talked for an hour. And then I drove home to my apartment, where my plants were thriving in the good light and my books were arranged on the shelf exactly as I had put them and the kitchen was mine and the silence was mine and every corner of that small, imperfect, beautiful space was entirely, unreservedly mine. I sat on my couch in the afternoon light and I felt something I want to describe carefully, because it matters. Not the absence of pain. Not the arrival of perfect, cloudless happiness. Something more real and more durable than either of those. A sense of being correctly positioned in my own life. Of being aligned. Of trusting myself in a way I hadn't trusted myself in a very long time. I was building something. Something real, and mine, and true. It was not perfect. But it was free. And I had learned, finally, at the cost of 6 years and 1 night in the dark with a suitcase and shaking hands, that freedom and perfection are not the same thing, and that freedom is the more precious of the two. I want to speak to you directly before I close this story. Because I know that some of you listening to this right now know exactly what I'm talking about. Maybe not this exact story. Maybe it isn't a husband and a mother-in-law. Maybe it's a family you grew up in that consumed you. Maybe it's a friendship that only runs in one direction. Maybe it's a workplace where you are expected to give everything and never ask for anything in return. Maybe it's a relationship that looks fine from the outside and feels like disappearing from the inside. Whatever your version of this is, you know the feeling I'm describing. The feeling of enduring rather than living. The feeling of being functional rather than seen. The feeling of keeping the peace while losing yourself piece by piece. And if you are a Black woman especially, if you have been raised on the same gospel I was raised on, the one that says your strength is measured in how much you can carry, how quietly you can carry it, how long you can carry it without putting it down, then I need you to hear what took me 6 years and a headache nobody checked on to finally understand. Endurance is not the same as thriving. Silence is not the same as peace. Staying is not always the same as love. And you are the protagonist of your own life. Not the supporting character. Not the one who holds everyone else's story together while yours goes untold. Not the background. Not the function. Not the system that keeps the house running. You are the main character. You are the point. And the moment you truly, fully, down to the bone believe that, everything changes. My name is Camille Yvette Broussard. I packed my bags at 2:47 in the morning and I walked out of a life that was consuming me and into a life that was waiting for me to claim it. And it was the most important thing I have ever done. They thought I would always endure. They thought my silence was contentment. They thought my patience was permanence. They thought my staying was because I had no choice. They were wrong. And the moment I understood how deeply, completely wrong they were, the moment that truth traveled from my mind into my hands and my feet and my spine, I was already gone. Not running. Walking. Slowly. Deliberately. With my grandmother's earrings and my suitcase and 6 years of reclaimed silence. Out the door. Into the dark. Into myself. They thought I would always endure. They never imagined I would choose myself. But that is exactly what I did. And I would do it again. 1,000 times. I would choose myself 1,000 times. If this story reached something inside you today, if it felt like something you needed to hear, please take just a moment right now to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. And drop a comment below and tell me, what does choosing yourself look like for you? What is the one thing you have been enduring in silence that you are ready to speak out loud? I read every single comment. This community is a real place, and your voice belongs here. Thank you for staying until the very end. That means everything. The next story is already waiting for you, and I promise, it is worth staying for.